Welcome back to Hogback Observatory in Gallup, New Mexico. This is a series of videos to demonstrate how to assemble a PureTech Telestation Observatory. Okay, now for this video, we are going to install the roof cross beams. There are 4 of these all together, and we'll go over how to orient them, which ones go to the front, which ones go to the middle, which ones go to the back, which slides they go to, and then how to actually put them together. All right, first of all, the first thing you need to notice is on the slide beams, which are the ones out here. I'll take you to the outside so I can better reference this. On either side of the building, obviously, is these big roof slides, okay? 2 on this side, 2 on the other side. You'll notice on both of them, one of them is a little farther away from the building than the other. So this would be the long, considered the long slide, and that's the short slide. Now that long and short has nothing to do with its length. They're the same that way, but it has to do with inside when you're going to put the cross beams across. The ones that are farther from the wall, the outside of the wall, are going to be considered the long cross beams, okay? This also coincides with what would be labeled as probably your B observatory. Even though this is one observatory, they kind of consider it to be 2 half observatories put together in the middle. So therefore this one has been listed as Observatory 2, Observatory 1. Same over here, Observatory 1, Observatory 2, okay? And as you'll notice, let me go this way. The slide beam that's farther out on both sides, see it right there, where that one is farther out than that one, okay? Those are both on Observatory 2 section of this telestation, whereas the shorter ones are the ones on the Observatory 1. So in your directions, your paper directions for setting up your observatory, of course it might not be the same size as mine, so there might be a little different labeling, but it is going to tell you that the long slides and the long, or not slides, but the long cross braces will go to the front and back of the slides on observatory whatever, okay? Observatory 1, Observatory 2. In my paper instruction manual, it said the long slides, or I'm sorry, the long cross beams go to the front and back of Observatory 2. Because if you look out there, Observatory 2, this portion of the observatory, has the slide beams that are farther away from the outside wall. Therefore, the cross beam has to be longer. It says in my directions, the short cross beams go to the front and back of Observatory 1. And if you look up there, the slide beam right there is closer to the wall on the outside. Same with the other side, okay? So that's what determines where the long and the short cross beams go. So if you look, each one of these beams is going to be listed. I want to do this, it's kind of early in the morning here, so I'm trying to do this where I can actually see this. You'll see the piece of tape right here where it says long. Okay, I'm going to come back here. We're going to have to get up because this piece of tape is on top. And you'll see the tape here. I can see this right. Okay. Kind of at an angle here. Okay. Toward controller wall. See if I can see my finger. Long. Okay. So that's the long one. If you'll notice on this back wall where these rails are, this is listed as controller here. So this is where you put the controller. On the top piece of tape here, this says it's the long beam, which we know it is because it's got the slide out there that's farther away from the wall. So this will be the long one. This is upside down, but towards controller wall arrow pointing towards the controller wall. Okay. Same on the other side. This is listed as the short toward controller wall arrow. There's the controller wall. So this is how you orient these as far as which are the long and which are the short. Now, the other thing to understand is the front ones, the front cross beams, meaning the front of each section, which will be the middle of the building, okay? This will be the front of this roof section, and that will be the rear, the solid back wall, okay? This will be the front. That will be the rear of that roof section for the other wall. These braces right here need to be facing up. See how all of them are up? Okay. And then, as you saw from the painter's tape listed on top, which side goes towards the controller wall on each one. Now, on the back beams for each, you're going to notice some things about the beam. Number one is on one length of it is a seal right here, a rubber seal. See that? And it goes the whole length. Then you're going to see a row of screws that are just set in there, not screws, button bolts. And on another side, there's going to also be some button bolts in there. This is what you're going to use to attach the roof panels to this beam once you get to that point. So, as you're looking at this, we're going to go up on this ladder a bit. Okay. The seal, the side that's got the seal, faces down. Okay. The button bolts are going to be facing up and out towards the back. Okay. So the button bolts will face out from the observatory. The less amount of button bolts are going to face up, pointing towards the sky. And at the end, you're going to see a bracket at either end. Okay, you can see the one right there. And turn over here, and the one right there. Okay. This goes towards the end of the roof. Let me push that, and I'm going to move my ladder so I can show you. Okay. So that this piece of the framework for the outside slide, this beam, as you will see there, lines up right against that. The brace or bracket, whatever you want to call it. Let me move this so I can, right there, is going to connect into that slot by the process we said earlier about putting walls and everything else together. You will take these two button screws out slide the drop-in nuts back behind this. I'm going to just call them brackets from now on if I can remember to do that. You'll take the button bolts out, slide the drop-in nuts behind that bracket, which will be up like this, and then you will fasten them in there by putting the button bolts through the bracket into the slide nuts. Same applies to the other side. Trying to get this oriented here. Okay, and the same will apply to that side. You can see the two button bolts there. You can see the bracket, and this beam here, the cross beam, lines up with that frame member piece, that last one on the outside roof slide. Okay, and that means that when that's all done, this rubber seal that was going underneath will then be what seals between the top of the wall of your observatory and the roof. Okay, exact same thing on the other side, so I won't show that again. But then here, where you do the front cross beams, the ones that will come together in the middle of your observatory, these are the front of each roof section, and they come together. Okay, same process here. You can see it right here. You can see the button screws. Here is the cross beam properly orientated towards the controller wall, which was there. Okay, to the long ones, which it labels right here, says this is the long one, goes to the slides that are the farthest away from the wall, corresponding to observatory 2 on my setup. It will correspond to whatever your directions say, whether it's observatory 1, 2, 3, depends on how big your observatory is, how many sections that they quote split it into in order to give you directions to put it together. This one, they decided it was easier to consider it observatory 1 and 2, basically each half. So you will see that in your directions that will spell that out. So then this here, again, will match up right there. This outside frame piece with the cross beam, the bracket right there. And then once it's up there, you will take these two button bolts out, slide the slide-in nuts that are behind them, behind that bracket, line up the holes right there, put in your button bolts into the slide-in nuts that are behind there, and then before you tighten it up, you'll do that on both sides, but you want to make sure that this corner is square. Okay, you don't want it off a little bit, because these will slide back and forth. So you can move this brace a little bit and tighten it in the wrong spot. Make sure it is square right there. Okay, the easiest way to do that is the same way I had showed you in a previous video. You can take your square right here, once you have that set together, you can lay that square right up against those two beams. Okay, and you'll make sure they're square. If it's slid down a little bit, that square won't fit right in that corner. And if this one is right up against it, but let me lay this across here. Let's say that one you have in a little bit this way and not right squared up to the corner. but this one is squared up to the corner, then that means this is not straight, okay? It's going to be tilted that way a little bit, or even vice versa. Why that matters later, number one, when you're putting this all together, you want to keep it square, again, so it doesn't get caught up in the wheels out there because your roof's all out of square. And second of all, when these come together, when it's all done, you want these to seal really good. And if one of these beams is, either of these beams is not straight across the building, when the roof comes together, you'll have a little gap, okay? Could be prone to leaks. So again, when you do these and the back ones, square your corners. And as I assemble this and then come back and show you again, I'll show you the corners all squared up and everything together. So it all works the same way on both sides. I'm going to go ahead and assemble this. And then now that we got it properly orientated, is that the proper word, orientated or oriented? Okay, whichever word is appropriate there. Once these are properly oriented or orientated, I think it's oriented. Yeah, that's how good my English is. Once we got them oriented, we can then assemble them, making sure they're square. And I will show you how that looks. Okay, a little helpful tip here. So when you put your first beam together across your roof here, something that's going to be helpful. Understand these outside slides are a bit heavy, and when they're in the section of wheels, the top of the framework that comes up so you can attach the other cross beams and then build your roof on it, these are going to want to lean out a little bit. It's lower on the brace where it goes through the wheels, and then this framework's on top for the roof section. Well, just because of their weight, they're going to want to lean out on both sides. When you connect your first side, it's easy enough because neither side's connected. You can move this beam back and forth, you know, wiggle around to get those screws to line up. When you get to this side, you're going to have a gap, okay? Because attaching the second side is going to bring those outside slides on either side together, and instead of tilt it out just a little bit, it's going to bring them up and straight. So if you're going to be sitting here and trying to hold this, and I took out the 2 button bolts and I slid the first nut behind there, you're going to need to pull this together at the same time you're lining up that pop in nut behind there, and then with the other hand, you know, trying to screw in your little button screw. And I will show you right here, these things are not very long, okay? They're not very long. So you're going to need like 3 hands. So a good tip, have a third hand, okay? Whatever type of clamp, whether it's a good old-fashioned C-clamp, one of these, one of those fancy ones where you can put it on there and crank, 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 ratchet it in, whatever you need, go ahead and do that, okay? That's going to go a long ways. Just make sure when you apply it, like see if I do it there, that's not going to work because it's covering my hole. I can't get my button bolt in there. So, trying to do this with it. Okay, so here we are with all the roof cross braces put in. Trying to hold this one hand here. There it is. Good and tight in the corner, no rock. And I mean, you know, the carpenter square isn't rocking. Everything's good, tight, and square. There, 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 there. Other side as well. There, 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 and there. I will push these back together, and the next step is going to be there's a center portion of this roof. It's like just kind of a middle in each one of these sections. In the middle there, a kind of brace that comes up, because obviously these have a pitch to them, on either side in the back, not the front. You don't want stuff draining into your observatory, but it comes to a pitch, and where these come together is the peak of the roof, so snow or whatever can flow off of there a little bit. You still have to brush snow off if you get a lot of snow. But anyway, these come together, and when that center piece, which is in each one of these, let me turn the other way here so I don't fall off the ladder. Oh, I went the carpenter square. Center piece comes across each one of these that will hold the peak of the roof. Then all the framework for the roof will be done, and we'll be ready to start putting on the panels. And that will be the next short video, or actually what I'll do is I'll add it to the end of this, is putting those center braces for the peak. And then after that, we'll go to actually assembling the roof panels and do a video on that. Okay, next here, we need to install the gear rails. As you can see, these have the rail on them with the gear teeth. I'll lift this up a little bit along it there. That the wheel, the geared wheel on the gearbox on top of the motor engages with that, and that's what turns and opens and closes the roof. On each of this, there's a sticker that says towards the motor. So this will be put up there with this side towards the motor, with the gear rail over the top of the wheel. Now that bolts on top of this back cross piece here, rail that we assembled earlier, and then the front one here is going to bolt up on top of that, so it runs across from the back rail, remember we called it the back rail, to the front rail. This will engage with it. Now this is going to be up higher. We've got it lower now so we can install the rail, and then we're going to move this up. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to loosen these a little bit on either side. You can see them there. We're going to slide this up to where it's just close, just engaging with the teeth in the rail. Okay, once we do that, then we're going to move up these blocks with the jack screws in them till they just engage with this bottom block here. Okay, we'll screw these down a bit so we have some adjustment we can make. So then once we bring this up to the block, and this will all be up here higher, we'll bring these blocks, the jack screws, the adjustment blocks, up just underneath it. Of course, we will have to turn that down a little bit. Reason we want to do that is to set this properly. Let me get my little step stool here so I can get a little higher and show you. Remember when we put in this back cross brace here, I told you there's a rubber seal that runs underneath the whole thing, this one and on the opposite side. Well, for this to be set right, you want this gear engaged with that rail and the gear rail enough to where it lifts this up maybe half an inch. Basically what you want is where this rubber seal comes down and it touches the top of the wall just a little bit, not squished, but just enough to keep dirt, rain, and stuff like that out. You don't want the full weight on this because number one, it'll wear it out. Number two, it can catch a little bit and rub. You want this enough to where it just barely starts to squish it, okay? And you accomplish that by once you get this motor up in place and this gear wheel engaged with the gear rail that'll be going across here. Then you use the jack screws to adjust that up just enough to lift that so that that rubber gasket is just sweeping across the top rail of this wall. We'll do the same on both sides. See, this one too tells you how to line it up. What we will do is we're going to set it where it's that gear rail on the gear beam there is coming right over this gear wheel, okay? I'm going to set it just so it's right in there. We're going to measure the distance once we do that from a set point, like we've always said on all these. We'll pick a set point here. We'll measure that over to where that rail is. And then when we come to this side, we'll do the same thing. We'll measure so everything stays square and that get the sun out of there. Everything stays square and so that the gear rail doesn't run off of the gear wheel. Everything stays lined up. We're going to then measure from here. Hope that sun's not in your eyes. Across to where that rail is going to come in the middle of the beam, and we'll screw it down and tighten it there. That way that rail will stay in the middle of this roof section and straight right over that gear wheel. Okay? Now, last thing before I put it together and then show you. Good thing to do is these are heavy. Nowhere near as heavy as obviously the sliding rails on the outside to move the whole roof, but these have some weight to them. So what you do is you measure the distance, you set a level on top of those cross braces there. Get it where it's level, measure the distance from your floor to underneath those rails, okay? Then whether you're going to use a jack, you can just use I used a pole here. You can use a 4x4, 2x4 if you want. If you use it without anything to adjust it, like a jack, or I've got these here which are used for like lifting up, second stories on a house or down in a crawl space to support subfloor stuff like that. That's what these are. But whatever you have, if you have something like this or some type of jack, even a hydraulic jack that you can, pump up and bring it up, then you would cut your rail, whatever that distance is, not your rail, but your 4x4 or whatever you're going to use, you would cut that so it's the same height from your floor to underneath. Then you could just push it under there if you want, with just a solid 2x4 or 4x4, something like that. And it would hold the weight on those while we're building the rest of the roof. Now, that doesn't give you any adjustment. I don't know that you'll need it, but if you want to have an adjustment or a way to adjust it, you can do something like this, a jack, some type of thing, and you would just cut that 4x4 or that 2x4 or that post like I have, whatever, a little bit shorter to accommodate that. Let's say, round number, this was 100 inches tall, right? You would cut your 2x4 or 4x4, whatever, 100 inches to put it under there to hold it. If you wanted to use a jack so you can make an adjustment, then you have to minus off that the height of your jack. On this particular one, and you'll have to forgive me, I got some light on my screen, some sunlight, so it's hard to see my screen, but I think I've got it here. This thing, the distance, you have to account for it from where this post sits in there. So for instance, I cut this pole a little shorter. The measurement was 78 and 78 3/4, I think it was. And with this, with the distance where that sits in the cup, it was around 10 inches, so I cut the pole at 68 3/4 and then jacked it up just a little bit to where it just held under there and was supporting the weight, of course, with a level on top here to make sure that the level was sitting there, wasn't rocking. The bubble was right in the center like it should be, showing that it was level, no flex. And so now this is going to support the weight, and if for some reason I need to adjust it up or down, I can do that. So you choose whatever method you want to do to support those beams in the center. while you're constructing the rest of the roof. I'll go ahead and do those, put those together, and then come back with a video, show you all of them together, including moving up the motors and the gearboxes so that they're lifting just that little bit. Half an inch maybe less. You just have to look at that gasket that's underneath that rail and watch. If you go too high, you'll see daylight underneath it. And you can let it down a little bit so it just starts to squish that rubber seal along there so that you can keep stuff from blowing in under your roof. One other thing to show here before I assemble these is you see on the end, it's got the bracket with the 4 holes, okay, on either side. Now I'm going to point out, when you lift that up here, remember earlier I mentioned when you set this rail that had the rubber gasket in there, that there was button bolts on the top side pointing at the sky, and there's a bunch on the outside here. The outside ones you can move when you put on the roof panels. These 4 that are here are to bolt those brackets. So again, same old procedure. You'll take these out, you'll set that brace up here, you'll move the nuts to where they line up underneath those holes, and you'll set these button bolts down in there. That's how you attach it to this rail. Now in the instructions, it'll tell you, or may tell you, did in mine too, make sure you line up the mark on the rail with the mark in the middle of that brace right there. Well, those are not there. They were not marked when they took these apart, disassembled it after testing. They're not on any of these rails. But as I mentioned, first you can see the button bolts that are also up here on top of those, so you can fasten it there too. Use the process if there's no marks that I said, is you set the rail over that gear wheel there, come across, make your measurement from that gear wheel, the center of that gear wheel, to over in your side sliding rail, the same here to the center right there, and you will get a straight gear rail there that will stay on top of that wheel. If there's no marks, you'll have to do it by making that measurement and keeping everything nice and straight and square. Okay, I'll assemble these and come back with a video showing you everything assembled. Okay, so all the roofing pieces are in now. There's the sun. Sorry, that's in the camera there. All the cross pieces, the gear rails, and I will point out a few things. Number one is on these motors, where this bracket is on the wall might not be in the center of the wall when you pull it out of the crate. What's important is that this gear right here on your motor is going to have to match up with this rail up top that's got the gear on there. Well, this is going to go in the center of your wall from side to side. You want to set it up to where that gear is going to be in the center of your wall. You'll have to move this possibly, depending on whether they left it in place when they tested it at the factory or whether they moved it for some reason. Mine were moved over, so I had to move them. Simple process. Just take loose. You don't even have to take them out. Just loosen the 3 bolts, okay, on either side, and then the whole unit will slide over. But to know where it needs to go, this rail has to go in first, lined up in the middle of the building. Same with the other side. Now sometimes I'll have a mark there where these go. Mine did not have those marks, so just measure half and half, and then set your rails across. I'll get up on the ladder and point that out real quick. And then once those are in, and then let me turn the other way so the sun doesn't keep getting in the video here. And then after you set this gear rail, then you're going to set this piece right here, this white piece. And as you'll see, there's a notch in there, which is where this gear rail goes in. This is a roof support. And then they bolt together. Now, this model, mine, the 10 by 15 or 10 1/4 by 15, there's only one of those roof supports. Depending on what type of roof you have will determine how many of those are and where they're placed. Okay? Mine had one per section, so that means that was positioned halfway between the cross piece there on the back wall and then the front cross piece. So you measure halfway, you set that. The same on this side, halfway, you set it. And this here, you'll measure halfway from here to the back rail, halfway from there to the front rail, and then you'll set your brackets. All pretty simple, all pretty standard. If you have a bigger observatory, you might have a couple of these, and then they'll be spaced, you know, 1/3 of the way, 2/3 of the way to the end, or whatever. It will depend on what size your observatory is, and you can get those measurements from Vito. He will tell you what the measurement is from that back wall to the roof brace, and if you have more than one, he'll let you know what the interval is for spacing those. Okay, so those are done. Then again, once you set the gear rail, you set your roof support, then you will move, if it's not already there, you will move that whole rack there over until your gear wheel is lined up with your gear rail. Okay, and then to set this for the proper height, and I said this before, but I've still got to do that yet. These blocks will be moved up with these jack bolts that you'll see right here, and a jack bolt right there in this block. You'll move them up until the jack bolt touches these blocks, and then you can screw those up, and you want to mesh these gears here and do it enough to where you lift this part of the roof to where the rubber seals here, you want it where it's just coming down and just making contact with the wall and a little bit more. You don't want it squished. Right now this is just sitting there with all the weight on there. But by making this adjustment, that will make it where this rubber seal in here comes down, just touches the top of the wall, and a little bit more to create a seal. That's all you want. Okay, I'm going to take you up on the ladder here real quick, show you. Let me move this a little bit for me. Okay, so up top here you can see where right there is where I bolted in the gear rail, and then it gets bolted here on either side, and over on the far side you'll see where it's bolted in there. Really easy, just 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 here. Well, screws are already in the rails. You just have to loosen the button bolts, slide over the drop ins, line them up. Do this halfway from there across this rail to there. So the midpoint right here to the midpoint of this bracket, that's where you set them. Okay, and up here it's just as simple too. There's just brackets. Same thing with the button bolts and the slide-in nuts. So once you get everything lined up, like I pointed out in the video, you're good to go. So now all the roof framing is in place. Now it's time, let me move my ladder, to start putting the actual roof together. And I will do that in the next video here. And these 2 pieces I put together just to check out the fit. They'll come apart because you need to put caulking in between, but we'll go over all that. And there you have it. Roof is framed and we're ready to start assembling the roof panels.